After I arrived at Mrs. Velderhoff's home, there was a meeting on what to do, but certainly not to stay in Haarlem. That was better for me to leave the area on the west coast of the Netherlands. I go to an address in the Netherlands that is on the east side of the Netherlands, a couple of miles from the German border, with an uncle of mine and an aunt, and he is the mayor of that municipality on the east coast of Holland, close to the German border. His name is Mr. Boot, and he had offered me to come for the summer because he is in an area, not in the urban area of Amsterdam or Haarlem or The Hague, but he is outside. Yeah. And I spent the summer months there, that's July and August. At this time, the German army was in full retreat from France, going through Belgium on the way up north to go to all of Holland, all of the Netherlands, and then make a right turn, the area of where now the city Arnhem is. And that is, of course, well known, the name Arnhem, for a bridge too far, that film where the Allies tried to get over the Rhine River and then go straight for Berlin. That was a big drama for the Netherlands, for the Allies, and at the battle the Germans won. So I was there seeing the German army in retreat. They were badly beaten. They had been under so much fire, bombs, artillery rounds, you name it. The Allies, Eisenhower was in charge of all that. They were non-stoppable. They were coming right through France, Belgium, on their way to this town, Arnhem. And they passed my place. I saw all these Germans in torn uniforms, and it was a sight to be seen, and of course made me very happy. The more the German army looked beaten, the better it was for all the Dutch people looking at them. Well, they ended up at a forested area in Arnhem, big city, big vacation area in the Netherlands. You know, it's very nice scenery. At that time, my uncle was ordered to deliver workers for defense works in that area to stop the Allies to come up from the south on their way to Germany. And my uncle had been in his function in spite of the fact that many mayors of cities and villages and all that decided to give up the job. They did not want to cooperate with the Nazis, although their defense, who stayed on, said, I can be of help. People going under, I can help the Jews find addresses, Jews from Amsterdam, because that is another story, but the Jews of Amsterdam had been eliminated by the Nazis. They were dying in Auschwitz, Poland. 110,000 Jews were shipped out of Holland, and only a couple of thousand made it back after the war. So among the 6 million dead Jews, there are a lot of Dutch Jews from Amsterdam that never made it back. Now, the order to my uncle, the mayor, to deliver workers for the Nazis was the end game. He did not want to cooperate any longer. He didn't want to be a traitor to his own people. And he decided to go underground, leave his house as it is, He and I happened to be there on vacation, basically, and we buried all his wine. He had a nice wine cellar. We dug a big hole in the ground and buried it, knowing that there was not much good coming out of it. His books, he had a great library, and he gave it to his neighbor, which was a baker. He then told me to join him on the bike and go to the west of the Netherlands, back to the area where I came from, Haarlem. He had an address to go underground with his wife and his daughter. And so on sometime in the end of August, that the two of us got on a bike and drove from East Holland, East Netherlands, to the west. And his wife would go by public transportation, not bicycling. The moment that he was out of the area with me, the Nazis came and burned down his whole house. And the baker next door got chicken and burned all his books in the bakery. So his entire library was gone. She didn't want to be caught by the Gestapo and seeing all the books of Mr. Boot. That was bad news, of course, and he survived the war with his wife and his daughter on the west coast of the Netherlands, and I ended up near Amsterdam. At that time, I was with a friendly family on the way back to Mrs. Vellerhof, months after the disaster of being picked up at home and so on. So now I am in a suburb of Amsterdam when on a Sunday, September 17, the big operation will start. Coming from England, thousands of paratroopers going over our head and dropping at Arnhem. These people lasted about 10 or 12, 14 days, something like that at the most. Because the operation, Market Garden, as it was called, was under the supervision of a well-known British general, Montgomery. And you have names that you get used to eventually. There is Eisenhower, there is the British Montgomery, there is General Patton. All those names were all coming up in the news at that time. So Montgomery came up with his idea of shortening the war in Europe, finishing up the Nazis by moving fast through the Netherlands from Belgium and then making a right turn at Arnhem, cross the Rhine River. That would be a very big barrier coming from Belgium, crossing the Rhine, the south of Holland, crossing the Rhine. It's a big river. But by Arnhem, the Rhine makes a 90-degree turn and ends up in the North Sea. So if you could get around the Rhine at Arnhem by surprise operation like that was Market Garden, then he had in front of him and all his armies one straight open line to Berlin. And by Christmas, he thought, so does Eisenhower, they had a free run to end the war and finish up Hitler in Berlin. That didn't work at all because Market Garden troops, the English paratroopers, and Polish, there was a contingent of Poles that were fighting against Hitler after they had escaped from Europe earlier in life. So they dropped them right on top of one of the strongest Panzer divisions of the Germans, who had retreated for recuperation. And where do we do that recuperation? Well, Arnhem is a nice shaded area, a forested area. And as they were recouping from the ordeal coming from D-Day, from Normandy, they just happened all their tanks, all their weapons right there, and they had eaten enough, and they had slept enough, and they were in good fighting spirits. Not knowing that they were there is when Montgomery dropped his armies down on them. And the paratroopers, of course, are lightly armed. They don't drop tanks out of an airplane, not at that time, now they do. But so here are all these light armed Britishers and Poles, cannon fodder for the tanks of the Germans, not waiting for them. They were surprised as much as anyone else. But they had the armor, and they made mincemeat of these Allied troops. The plan was drop from the air those thousands of Allied troops, and from the Netherlands on up north, there is a big army coming with Montgomery, Eisenhower's troop and all that. And you guys hold on for 2 or 3 days, the bridge over the Rhine River there, and we will then arrive there at the same time or a couple of days later, and that's the end of the Germans. Well, the roadways from the south through Holland are so small that if a tank breaks down on its way to Arnhem, coming from the south, going up there, maybe 2 days drive, then we have to stop on the bottom. The road to Arnhem got blocked very easily. It wasn't a 4-lane highway, and they had not taken that into account. So the group that was supposed to conquer the Rhine Bridge had to hold the Rhine Bridge against all the counter offensive of the Germans. And they were slaughtered out there. And 10 days later, there was hardly anyone left to hold the bridge. It was a disaster of the highest degree. And that ended this Operation Market Garden. The Dutch got a message from the Queen of the Netherlands in London over the radio. She talked for 5 years over the radio to the Dutch population. Asked the Dutch railroad workers to go on strike. The railroad workers, they strike, and the Germans could not bring in from the areas their supplies. So it was a helpful tool on our side. Just go on strike. Well, the rest is so bad. Hitler got so unbelievable cruel and said, we can give the Netherlands back to the ocean. We break the dikes. We flood the whole country. We don't ship in any food anymore. Let them all die of starvation, because he was absolutely devilishly mad. Now, the Dutch are now still occupied by the Nazis till the end of the war. The rest of Europe, when the Allied armies moved on later on into Germany and finally the Russians entering Berlin, that part of Holland stayed under the Nazis till the last day of the war. And that's when thousands of people in the Netherlands died of starvation. So I'm now on the West Coast, waiting for what the war will bring. I couldn't leave because the Germans were fully in control of that part of the world. And they rounded up males from 18, 17, 18 till about 50 in roundups called razzias. They would block part of a town, of a city like Haarlem or Amsterdam or The Hague or Rotterdam, and herd young men and older men, put them on transport to Germany by the thousands. And there was no more food. There was food only for the 300,000 German occupation force. They got everything they wanted: cheeses, all the good food, the vegetables, the beefs, nothing for the Dutch population. So now you get a lot of treks from the cities to the farms with a little container. Can I get some grain? I saw that happening when I was in hiding where now the Schiphol airport is, just adjacent to Amsterdam. So a farmer who had his own wife and kids, and he had given me an opportunity to go underground on his farm. So I had fortunately there my food with the farmer family. But from Amsterdam, flowing towards that area, the farm area, thousands of Dutch people, doctors, lawyers, teachers, mothers, grandmothers coming by, walking, walking, and that walking was so sad. I remember an elderly woman, a grandmotherly type, coming by from farther away to get some potatoes. The potato sack with potatoes, was there next to her husband's body, frozen. It was the severest winter in a century. So the hunger winter is for me a memory that I never, never forget. When you see that happen to your own people, the thousands of Amsterdammers needed to make a trip that may even cost them their life. So Teek stayed in her village called Bloemendaal. And her father had decided to stay in his home with his wife and two daughters. He had four daughters, and two of them lived at the parental home. Now, the Germans were building against the incoming invasion before D-Day a defense line called the West Wall. And in order to do that, they had to break cities up, build anti-tank walls. In order to prevent a tank from proceeding forward, you build, one way to do that is a ditch. Fill it with water, and the tank couldn't get out of the ditch. That is what you call a tank wall. Well, it didn't matter whether they planned the anti-tank ditch in the middle of the city. Whatever was in the way had to be blown up and be dug into a ditch, whether it were homes, schools, hospitals, it didn't matter. And they did that in the western part of the Netherlands. The Hague had a ditch dug right through the beautiful mansion of my grandfather in order to defend the area where my future wife, Tiek, lived at that time. Everyone had to be evacuated and then find your own quarters wherever in the rest of the country. Anyway, Bloemendaal was empty, except Tiek's father was a stubborn Dutchman. Of course, he couldn't work anymore and go by train to his work in Amsterdam, where he worked all his life. So he decided to hide in his own house. At night, he had to get some food supplies coming in, which was dangerous. But if he was caught, he would end up being jailed. And jailing was very bad because they used every Dutchman in prison as a hostage. If a German was found dead, whether he was killed by the underground or not, they would take a certain number and shoot him, execute him. So he was very careful to stay inside the house. And when the time was that everyone had to be inside and could not be on the street, that's when he went out and then got some food supplies. How he did it, I don't know, but he got food supplies. At that time, there was no fuel at all. So in this historical winter of 44 into 45, they sat there with nothing to warm them. And no lights could shine out of the house either, no candle light. At that time, one of the ways to get food supply into Bloemendaal was to go on a bike and cross most of the width of the Netherlands to where Tieck's sister lived. She was at that time married, and they lived on the East Coast, where I came from, where Mayor Boot lived. But that was a very dangerous route. The Allies kept every rolling vehicle or boat on a canal from moving from the air with fighter planes. Any train that these squadrons of fighter planes saw, they took under fire. Locomotives were their preferred target. You know, you shoot the locomotive to pieces. All the steam comes out and that train stops. And that's the end. And then you can easily, with 3, 4, 5 fighter planes, go right over the train, and whoever is in the train supposedly be German soldiers, but not often. They were just regular Dutch passengers. They were also machine gunned down. Yeah. The roads, any car on the military car on the road may have been passing a bicycle, Tieck on it, with her sisters. Fortunately, she was never under fire, but the bikes were easily recruited by the Germans. So they would tell you, get off the bike, and you lost your bike. And another thing is that there were no more tires. So how do you drive 4, 5, 6 hours on a badly maintained road from west to east? The only innovation we did was put a garden hose around the valve and then and go drive. Very difficult, tiresome, and halfway they had to sleep. So they went to buildings that were empty, and whoever made it to that building just spread out a blanket and lie down. No food, no heat, just so that you could rest. And she did that a couple of times, twice or 3 times, from Bloemendaal to the German border, close to the German border in Holland, where her older sister had married a man, and he helped them with food, not only to feed them there, but to put on that bike, tie it up to the bike, and then go boom, 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 back all the way back to Bloemendaal to live for a couple of more days or weeks, whatever it was. So she really was also an actual victim of the hunger winter. Yeah. And they didn't have at that time women wearing pants. So she had a skirt and that whipped up with the wind and freezing to death almost. Yeah, that was, they did that. Yeah. Kudos to Tieck for doing that, yeah. So I was feeling pretty secure back at my old bedroom at Mrs. Velderhof's home. The Dutch have the 5th of December as a great festive evening, actually, St. Nicholas, Lots of presents go back and forth in every family, and that is hundreds of years old. St. Nicholas was the time to get together families. Our somewhat comparable to Thanksgiving Day, the 5th of December, in Mrs. Felderhoff's home, where her own kids, my brother Hank, because he fell in love with one of her daughters, and they got married, and both are dead now. Died a couple of years ago, but so and I was there, and then her own sons. The Germans knew that. Every household in Holland had onderduikers, divers, coming back to their parental home and so on. Brother Hank, on the 6th of December, left the house to go back to his dive address, far away from where I was, where we were, where the Felderhof. At that moment, he ran right into a patrol of German soldiers. They were patrolling that little dead-end street to look for culprits who had not registered. And at that time, he had no way to escape. He had 3 or 4 German soldiers, not bad people, not the SS and not the Gestapo, but this just tired German soldiers who came probably from deer farms with their parents constantly in need and in danger of bombing, and Russians coming from the Soviet Union slowly towards Berlin, all that. And these boys were tired of the Nazis themselves, I guess. But they had a job to do. They had, of course, there was always a sergeant with them to keep them doing the jobs of rounding up what they call the razzias. Hank walked straight into their group, and at that time, Ida, one of the daughters, Felderhof, saw that happen. She ran outside and grabbed his arm and started pulling at Hank with 2 Germans holding on to his shirt or whatever, and then his other arm. They didn't get anywhere. They just kept pulling and pulling at this boy. He was at that time 19 probably. Then she said, "Do you like old pre-war coffee beans?" My parents from the Indies, the first Christmas, they were there in Indonesia. The 2 boys were with the family, Felderhof. They sent Christmas presents. They were paper bags filled with real coffee beans. Ever since the Nazi-dom ruled over Germany, there were embargoes. Coffee did not get into Germany even before the World War. And they had some surrogate for coffee. So ever since the late 30s, many Germans had never tasted good coffee. My parents sent this big package for Christmas, and Mrs. Felderhof, in her foresight, knowing that Europe would soon explode, Café Bohnen, they looked as if Jesus coming back to them or something like that. But these guys were immediately let Hank loose and said, "Ja, wohl, ja, wir wollen Kaffee." And she said, come on in. And so she guided, Hank was let go. They were not interested in brother Hank. They went in, and she just, with a spoon, went into the big bag. I don't know that she showed the whole bag, but she a spoon, spooned out a little bit, half a handful of for these three guys, and they were putting them in their mouth like candies. And Hank was loose, and he disappeared immediately away. He never came back there. And then they left, and then they were very danke, danke. They were so happy with the couple of beans they got. How strange a survival can depend on, just some, maybe 10 beans each, got 10 beans. And Hank never came back till the end of the war. Yeah, he had a real underground job. In north of Amsterdam, he was with an underground resistance group. And they were waiting at night north of Amsterdam for cylinders coming down by parachute. And in these cylinders, you opened them up, there were guns for the Dutch underground. They wanted to liberate themselves when the liberation was close by, like Paris was liberated by the French underground, because that's what they insisted. And they asked Eisenhower not to send in American troops. They wanted to liberate Paris by French. So the Dutch had the same feeling. When liberation is close by, at the doorstep, we Dutch, we come out in regular civilian clothes, no uniforms, but with a Sten gun, and machine gun, or a pistol, or whatever. And Hank was there and received them in a meadow north of Amsterdam. So he was out of Haarlem, and then I followed very soon afterwards and went to my dive address, where now Schiphol is, near Amsterdam. And that was a difficult trip, because it was still the winter, terrible winter. And I had nothing else but my shoes on and heavy clothes, a couple of layers of clothes over it, and started to walk by day. And during that trip from Velderhof House to my dive address, there were 3 moments that I could have been picked up. As I was walking as a lonesome person with a knapsack on my back, on one of those roads, there was a patrol of Germans on bicycles. And they were going to do a razzia further up on my road in an agricultural area with a little capital cities, you could say. And they passed me, looking at me, saying, "Oh, we'll get you in a little while when we get to the city." The village was called Head Village. It was Hoofddorp. And I saw them stopping in Hoofddorp, maybe a mile away, putting their bikes against a church, and then coming up as a patrol with maybe 10 men down my way. There were some houses along the road. They went in asking and looking for a male person that could qualify for work in Germany. And I saw that coming up, and I had time to go into the very first laborer's house. Nothing fancy. One of the area was all agriculture, and a farmer, owner of many acres, would need help on this. So one of those laborers was was the owner of that house with his wife. And I went up, and there was no house on either side of the road, only big agricultural ditches with water, So I got crossed the little ditch over a little bridge, got into the house, and I said to the woman, do you have a place for me to hide? The Germans are on their razzia. They coming. Your neighbor will be visited. You will be visited across the street. They just rounding up. And she hesitated a moment and said, oh my gosh, where did they come from? I said, right there, a mile away at the church. Put the bicycles against the wall, and they are now step by step coming up here. When she started to cry, then my husband just left for the church over there. I said, oh, he won't be here. He won't make it. Whereupon she said, well, then I have the hiding place for you. That is his place. And I said, where is it? And she said, behind the fireplace with a big heavy iron heating place with anthracite. Anthracite is coal. In the corner of the living room. So there is a chimney going up. It was cold as hell. And she said, but I need to pull it off the wall. It was very heavy. And then on the side, you had some roster. You could look through it, It would blend in with the two walls. The walls like this, in a 90 degree. And then that steel thing was as big, well, maybe as big as this chair here. And you opened it up on the top, on the forward, and then with a big scoop, the anthracite went in, and then you got some kind of a mica windows, so you could see the fire, and then it would glow all day long. And that was coal, just plain coal. But there was no coal anymore anywhere in the Netherlands. That was all gone. But in order to get in back of that whole contraption, both of us needed to pull hard. That was, I don't know, 200 pounds or something like that. It would slide very slowly. So I went in back of that heater, and then I pulled and she pushed, and it got back out, almost closed. But, there's the pipe to the chimney. I had to fold in back of that, really folding in a very uncomfortable position. But I could see through the side, through the screen, very little openings. And there it is. It wasn't long afterwards, there they were at her home. She entered, and she also entered, and she answered well. They said in German, and she understood German, we saw a man moving from the roadway into your house, and he need to come out. She said, like Mrs. Velderhof, very thinking quick on her feet, yeah, there was a man, he ran into my house, and he ran right through the kitchen and out into the big field, potato field or sugar beet field or whatever, because it was in the middle of the agricultural land. Oh, God. So they went following her indication and looked over hundreds of acres, empty field that had been plowed. And then just before the winter would set in. So it was difficult walking on a plowed land, big frozen pieces of clay. That is what happens when you plow. And these guys had enough done, razzias, tired. Maybe they were just good German sons from a farmer in the middle of Germany, had spent terrible time in Stalingrad in Soviet Union, and were happy that they were out of the front and recuperating in the Netherlands, for them recuperating compared to what they had gone through in the Soviet Union, in Russia. I'm not going to go out on that plowland look for this guy. So, and then also she offered some warm milk or something like that, get him out quickly. So I was safe there. Now comes the night. As the night before it got dark, the prisoners that they had taken from the church to further up and brought back to Hoofddorp, the village, maybe 25, 30 people they caught. They marched them back to Haarlem, passing her house. And I'm from behind the heater. I got really cramped. And I'm on the window, which the window started from the floor up about 2.5, 3 feet. And the curtains were closed somewhat like this here. And there she sees her husband among the 25 men. And she then ran outside to the front door to wave at him. Whatever his name was, she called him, he waved back. And I saw that from the living room under the curtain and through the window. Gosh, what a bad thing. What have I caused here? He could not have caught and made. He could never made. And that was a true statement when I told her, it's too late. If he has to come from Hoofddorp, he is already in their possession. Fortunately, he broke out of this group in Haarlem, near where I lived with Mrs. Felder. The night had settled, and they were still marching to some kind of a collection center in order then to be moved by train to Germany. And he managed to get out of that column and disappear into a forested area next door to where I lived. And after the war, I heard that from her when I visited her. Yeah, the war was over, and then I happened to pass that house. I went in, thanking her profusely for her help. He was there, met him. So that was a good part, the end of the story there. But now I'm in her house. She's a fairly young woman, maybe 28, 29, something like that. And she felt uneasy having me spending the night there. And so I said, I need to go to my previous address, not Velderhof, but on my way from Velderhof to my final destination, I had slept with a farmer whose son and I were in the same classroom in Haarlem. Willem Winter, I remember his name. And he put me up on the attic in his farmhouse when in the early morning, this same group doing the razzia had come out of his area and walked up on the farm area to take prisoner whoever they could find. So Wim and I were hiding in a fake corner of the attic. And they came and walked all over the building didn't see us, of course, it was a good hiding place. And they walked out and went on. And then the second day that they did the razzia, they were on bikes again. They almost caught me, and I escaped to that other house, the second escape address, you might call it. So I said, I need to go back to the night before where I slept. She said, I can carry you on the back of my bike. It's, but how do we do it? I want you to dress up as a woman. So I did that. I dressed up in her dress, and I had what you call babusha over my head, like a woman. And I sat there at the back of the carriage on the back wheel, legs out, and she was going into the direction where I had slept the night before. And by golly, it was good because they had left on the road a patrol with flashlights. So as we approached, she's pumping on the bike. The flashlight went from first her face and then mine. Now, just Lord help me. Do you see a male under this babusha, whatever you call it, or a female? Because I had lipstick on and rouge. And so that ended up fortunate. They signed both faces, 2 women on bike, go. I ended up with Wim, and then slept there till the next day. Now what? Go back to Mrs. Felderoff or where? I was running out of permanent dive addresses. I said, no, I need to go to Hoofddorp and continue where I was held back. Well, you take risks in life. I did. Second time, I walked the same road, went through Hoofddorp. I saw the church. There were no Germans, nothing. And I kept walking and walking. Now, I told you that over in the Netherlands, day after day after day, the Allies wanted to stop all German military traffic. So 3 fighter planes usually had the job to do that for a certain area. And they would fly around, and if it's like a hawk looking for a prey. And that happened at that moment when I had passed Hoofddorp on my way to my final address. And all of a sudden, there is a German staff car passing me on the way to Amsterdam. One high-ranking officer, one chauffeur, and a dog, and what you call these fast-running dogs, greyhound, yeah. So this officer and his chauffeur in an open staff car was racing as fast as he could because these 3 planes were looking for prey. And I thought that was great. The more Allied planes I saw, the better I felt, of course. The more killing they did, the better I felt. That is the whole mood. And so I went walking out there in this hard, frozen dirt on the side of the road. Ahead of me, another half a mile, there is a viaduct, a 4-lane highway. And this chauffeur at the open staff car thought, the sooner I get underneath that viaduct, the better protection I have against these guys above me. And he did. He made it, he raced past me, and I saw him stopping under that viaduct. But he didn't count on the skill of the three pilots. They saw that too. They saw him drive. They probably had seen him earlier before and disappearing under the viaduct. Now we know where he is, these pilots thought. And they came, made a turn above me, and then they came down with a very fast speed, almost right over the treetops, in order to get to this staff car underneath, sitting there, waiting there, protecting themselves against these guys trying to kill him. And they shot right over the road to reach him, and all three did that right at my ear. It was a loud noise, as these planes were trying to get him. So now they do that about three times. Cartwheel, like this. Come up, go fly right over the earth, and get that son of a bitch under the viaduct. Then they stopped. Maybe they were out of ammunition, I don't know what. Well, when this all happened, I had jumped off the road into the plowed area, that very hard clay, right? Pressing myself into that hard clay, frozen clay, as like an ant. I wanted to get in it, I heard these bullets flying right over the roadway, and I said, the farther I get into the agricultural land, the better. This was a very scary moment. So then it stopped. The planes went back to England, and I decided, oh, it's time to continue on to your dive address. And I passed this car. I had to get under that viaduct. Well, the officer, part of his skull was gone. The only survivor was the dog. And the dog was hurt, but was alive. So I looked at that and I thought, my golly, what a bullet can do, So the car was not running anymore. They had wanted to jump out, I guess. The chauffeur, he was still at the wheel, and the high officer was sitting next to him with part of his skull in front of the car. It had him right in the head. Very messy view to see that, but I felt very good about it. You dumb bastard, But anyway, that's you get very raw in your emotions. I suffered a lot from the Germans. I did. I really did. Education went up in nothing. I couldn't finish my school. I had a couple of good friends that were executed, school friends. They were on their way to the south of Holland to join the Allies. They were caught, executed, school friends. And I was on that way too one time. Well, that's another story, but I didn't make it. Fortunately, I would have been probably one of the victims as well. Crossing the Rhine River into the south of Holland was very, very dangerous because there were so many 300,000 German troops on the upper side, the north side of the Rhine River, which flows into the North Sea. And in order to cross to the Allies in southern Netherlands, you had to cross the water. You had to swim across ice-filled Rhine River water. So my brother talked me out of it. He was going with me, and then he said, you can do it. So that's how I stayed in the Netherlands till the bitter end. The last day of the war was in May. So when I walked on through, I must admit that some enjoy some joy in my heart seeing this disaster. This man and the chauffeur. I had pity for the dog. Dog was at a leash, couldn't move anymore. I didn't touch the dog either. I just walked on through, the faster the better. So now, close to the end of the day, and it gets dark. Not fully night yet, but it's clearly getting in 20 minutes, it would be dark night. And I end up on a crossroad and I had to go left and walk on a dike of the uh, area that was poldered. Poldering, it means putting a dike around a lake and pump the water out, and you have fertile ground. Further. So Holland is made up of many polders, Polder, polders, and that has a dike. And I was on that dike to walk now to the farmer into the direction of Amsterdam, or what today is Schiphol Airport. At that time, just plain agriculture, plowing land. And I'm on that crossing, and out comes a patrol with Germans patrolling. Whatever they were patrolling, they were there. And I run right smack into them. About 10 and a sergeant. All weapons on their shoulder. They were not fighting yet. But they were eager if they could, to find forced labor for their fatherland. And there is a sergeant at the head of this little group. I don't know where they were going, but it was a night patrol, clearly, for the rest of the next 4 or 5 hours, they would be patrolling that area there. A guy says to me, "Where is your Ausweis?" Ausweis is your ID. I was outside the time that you were allowed to be walking. You had to be inside a house or whatever. So the curfew was on, and I was not in a house. So there was not much that I could say, you're out or you're in. And this guy was a mean fellow. And he was saying, "Well, we will take you with us because your spare time," they call it. Spare is stopping someone, sparing, and time, Zeit, Sparzeit. You are guilty of walking here. And I came up with a nice lie. I said, "Yeah, I know, but I am ordered to report for German work in this town coming up, Aalsmeer." Aalsmeer is very well known in the Netherlands for its flower auctions. Aalsmeer was the city that I mentioned. That's where I live. I didn't live there, of course, but it came up and it was in front of me. I said, the instruction is, you register at the city where you were born, sort of like the Bible story, and I need to register there. I was born there. So the instruction, I'm following the instruction. And I said, I also have diphtheria. It's very contagious. And boy, if the Germans were ever afraid of contagious diseases, they just, and when I said, ich habe diphtheria, and I grabbed my throat, man, they were out of my path in no time. And I walked to my address and finally ended up there in good shape, tired. And that's that part of the story. I could tell you a little bit about the condition where I was in that farm, big barn. In that barn I had a couple of horses, and he had some cows. But there was in that barn a huge mountain of crop, grain, wheat crop that was brought in just before the winter set in, and that would be threshed in around the height of the hunger. Can you imagine why people came up and visited farmers? Because there was the food in the big barns. So it was from the ground all the way up to maybe 30 feet high, the roof, and wide. And the start of that pile, I was sleeping on the bottom of that haymow. The haymow had a start, a concrete wall, kind of a retaining wall, maybe 3 feet high, and then the farmer would build that up, right? And then for the whole winter, he had his crop in. In April, he would start threshing it in his threshing machine, and there's where his money come from, of course, selling it. And he offered me a hole in the bottom of that haymow. I could walk from the floor into the starter was planks. Planks were about this high, and then the haymow would start, right? But the bottom of the haymow was on the other side of the planks, this far from the ground. I took the one or two planks out and dig a hole in the bottom of that big grain mow, and then make it about 2 meters long and about 3 meters wide. That was my hole. And you know who lived in grain. In addition to that, there was a mate, a worker, an agricultural worker, who also didn't want to go to Germany, and he was offered a hiding place together with me. In order to go to sleep, you had to allow rats and mice running right over your face. And then the man next to me was taller, and when he would let go a fart, then you had to enjoy whatever came out there. that was such a stinky hole. It was amazing, but you had to do it because the farmer in his own regular home was not willing to have me in there because he had his own kids, he had his wife there, and they would come in at night checking his family home for people like me and my mate. So now, when you need to get out, you need to pee, you have to open up the hole and go where? Well, we are in the barn. And if you had to do number two, you don't want to show the Nazis, if they come, human feces. They know, hey, there's someone here. So you had to go behind the horses and mix your stool with the horse shit. Mix it up right behind them. You could have been hit by a hoof, whatever, but that was all part of survival. And then if I did my stool and went, and then maybe an hour later he had to go. So sleeping was very difficult to do that. And yeah, we made it, but that was something that I oftentimes think when circumstances are not really good for enjoying it. When you have done that, it's so primitive that it came to an end when the war ended. And of course, you can imagine that many people like me going through circumstances like that were totally going crazy of joy when the first Canadian Holland was particularly liberated, not by the British, but by the Canadians. And there was a Canadian army that had an assignment to conquer the Netherlands. And they lost a lot of people. The food situation at that time that I was with this farmer was so bad that Queen Wilhelmina in London had knocked on the doors of Churchill, Eisenhower, Montgomery. Think of my people. They're dying. Can you people help by aerial droppings? The war is over, you generals. But these people are dying by the hundreds in Amsterdam. They couldn't bury them because of the frost and all that. The church floors were used to put the bodies on, and you could get an extra bowl of soup by the given by the city with a shotgun to shoot the rats of the bodies, because there was no way to bury people at that time. So then the Allied command said, we need to talk it over with the Nazi command in Holland. And they were coming to a conclusion that the war was over. They were already in Berlin. The Russians were already in Berlin. And Hitler was close to committing suicide at the end of April. So then they decided to come in over a certain stretch coming from England in the bombers that had gone over for years over Holland with bombs. And this time these bombers, the flying fortresses of the American Air Force and Lancaster bombers of the British Royal Air Force. And they would come in one big convoy of airplanes flying low, but in a certain roadway. They couldn't go one way or the other. They had to, the Nazis dictated this airstrip from London, from England, all the way to the center of Holland and Schiphol, the airport, and then make a U-turn, and then over Schiphol, that was primitive at that time, drop everything they had in their bellies. And Schiphol, where I lived at that time, was okayed, approved by the Nazi occupation. So at the end of April, there came the first bombers by day, coming in, making a U-turn, and then dropping their goodies off. Swedish white bread. We hadn't seen bread at all, let alone white bread. And then all sorts of goodies that would not really help much to get a couple of million Dutch people survive, But it was a fantastic sight for a guy like me who stood in the middle of my uncle's field, big field. In the middle of his property, the Germans had built out of concrete an emplacement, a base for their anti-aircraft guns all throughout the regular war. And I went there in my uniform from the walk from the farmer's house to the center of his territory, where all that big concrete stuff was without the guns. The Germans had taken those out. And there comes the first bomber comes over my place, I take my coverall off and use it as a flag. And here is the gunner, the front of the airplane, at his gun, in non-active, of course. And I'm just, that was one of the most emotional moments of my life. End of the war was right then, there. And he went like that with me. And then soon afterwards, the bomb doors opened up and down came all sorts of packages. They busted open. Yeah, that was fantastic. And I kept waving, the next bomber, come on, come along, come along. So that, if you ask me what is your most emotional moment in life, Rob? Is it meeting your parents again after the war? No. It is that bomber that flew over and waved at me. I bring only good stuff for you. Yeah, so that's still an emotional moment. Enjoyment was also something that you never experience twice in life. 5 years of pent up occupation by killers all around you makes you go, you dance for 3-4 nights in a row if you have a girlfriend to do it with. So that was the liberation in Amsterdam. And of course, the music was new. 5 years long, we didn't listen to Allied, In the Mood, the regular music that entertained millions of Allied soldiers was all of a sudden available over the German music, you know. And so we danced and danced and danced forever, yeah. My girlfriend and I, and at that time I visited her immediately after I came out of the hole, the green hole, and then found out that she had survived, her father had survived, and the family was good. And he managed, as amazing as it sounds, he managed all through till the end of the war to live in Bloemendaal, in his own home, by being just hidden in his own house. No lights, no heating in the house. How they did that, I don't know. But that was a tough time, yeah.